Now that Iran's internet blackout is over, we're still asking how many dead during those 20 days. Nationwide New Year's protests met with a new measure of ruthlessness. We'll ask about a death toll that could run into the tens of thousands and what this scale of loss will mean for Iranians both at home and abroad. We'll also revisit Donald Trump's promise at the height of the defiance that help was on the way. What to make of U.S. warships only now arriving in the region. For what aim? Is Washington engaging or disengaging? What with allies like Saudi Arabia who want no part of a new bombing campaign, and with the U.S. pressuring Iran while easing away from a presence in neighboring Syria to support the Kurds. More importantly, the regime this time proved its ability to shut down the internet for as long as it takes. Despite the inflation that triggered the protests, it's still there. Has the Islamic Republic weakened after U.S.-Israeli strikes on its nuclear facilities last summer? Suddenly now emerged perhaps stronger. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking about Iran after the bloodbath. With us, Kian Habibian, co-founder of the We Are Iranians advocacy group. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
Thanks as well from Istanbul, journalist Borzu Daragahi publishes at borzu.substack.com. Thanks for just being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
From Washington, Behnam Bentaleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's think tank. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you all. Thank you.
And Lila Jacinto, Senior Editor at France24.com. How are you?
Not bad.
On the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. The reopening of Tehran's Grand Bazaar Tuesday amid heavy security, while heavy hearts are on display on social media. Tell me where you are this morning. That's the post from Masa, as she asked on her Instagram account. Her partner, Matim Gorbani, among the thousands killed in the protests. That story flagged by France 24's Ershad Alijani, who's investigating the extent of the crackdown. Yes, so you were saying, Ershad, your Instagram feed
it's my personal feed, and look, it's graveyard. Girlfriends, boyfriends, sisters, brothers publishing the photos of their beloved ones died in the last 2-3 weeks.
Kian Habibian, it's been 4 weeks since, again, at the height of the protests, you were with us on the night when they shut down the internet. You heard Ershad there talking about how his social media feed is a graveyard. How about yours?
It is exactly the same. The few Iranian people living inside who are lucky enough to get a connection to the internet send us videos, send us pictures of their loved ones that they have lost. All of them take the time to say where it happened, what exactly happened to them, and to prove to the world that they're not lying, because the Iranians had to fight for a few weeks just to prove that there is no interference by any other country, that this is their own will, that this is their decision to go in the streets to end this regime. They also have to send us either the picture of the body or the graveyard. And it is extremely hard to see these pictures. Every time we receive one, I die from inside. It has no end. I mean, the more we go, the more horrifying news we get from the people from inside, either about the methods or about the people who have been targeted. We talk about old people who have been in the streets in support, or people who just wanted to help someone who was injured. And we talk also about children who have been murdered by this regime.
And when people call you 4 weeks on, is it a furtive, quick call and then they hang up, or are they opening up more?
Well, I received one call. It lasted 1 minute. And the only thing they could say is that we can't say much. Everyone is fine. And for most of the testimonies we get, it is really hard to get some videos, because the people who go in front of the clashes, they don't bring their cell phones with them for their own safety, just in case they get arrested. Unfortunately, the violence was much higher than anticipated by the people. And therefore, it is really hard to get videos. We mostly have testimonies or pictures, but we are waiting on these videos that some people find the courage to record and send us to prove that it is extremely horrifying, and that the numbers we have here are, I think, largely below what actually happened.
And we're going to talk about numbers in a moment. There's still some proof of defiance that's coming out. For instance, on Tuesday, the student news site AUT News posting what ensued when medical students at Tehran University were told they couldn't hold a vigil for a deceased student, Aida Haidari. On Telegram, the site reports that the students were later heard chanting anti-regime slogans. Despite the crackdown, the extent of which we fear, Borzu Daragahi, there's still evidence of people who are ready to mouth off. Your reaction to that?
I think that, the defiance is real, and the opposition to the regime is real. As I've said on this show, probably 80 to 85% of the Iranian people inside the country are opposed to the regime, and more are willing to show their defiance and opposition. But this is a similar pattern that we've seen in the past. After the protests have been crushed on the streets, then they sort of move on to the campuses. We saw that in 2022 with the protests over the women life freedom protests. We saw it in 2009 with the Green Movement protests, and then the security forces and their allied militias concentrate on the campuses. I think that the regime actually appreciates when the people, and this is their thinking, the way the regime thinks, they appreciate when the people protest on the campus. It lets off a little bit of steam, and it lets them record these protests. And this is something people should be aware of, people inside Iran, that they're recording these protests and they're watching the body language of the protesters and trying to pick out who the leaders are among them and then target them later.
Okay, they record them, and then there's things that come out on Iranian semi-official media. For instance, I'm going to play you a clip, Borzu. Talk about this again, a nod to 2022. Once again, instances of deliberate eye gouging, tactic used during the Women Life Freedom Movement of 2022. This interview conducted with the government-funded Iranian Students News Agency.
In early hours of Friday, January 9th, a large number of patients came to the hospital, all of them suffering from eye rupture, unfortunately. Some of them had been injured in both eyes. There were a lot of eye injuries. Until Saturday, over 70 patients came to the hospital, plus 196 patients that we've sent to eye hospitals across the city with prior coordination. In total, around 1,000 patients presented to the hospital. These were the patients that needed urgent surgeries and suffered eye ruptures. I didn't take into account eyelid ruptures and patients not needing instant surgeries.
It's pretty straightforward, that clip. Your reaction to it, Borzu Daragahi?
Well, I think that, the regime has its narrative. They don't, at this point, and it's kind of maybe a little clever on their part, they're not denying that there was atrocities and terrible things that were happening on this date. Probably what this fine doctor is describing is the use of buckshot and pellets shot from shotguns by the security forces. The regime's narrative, however, is that, outside infiltrators came into these, otherwise peaceful protests and, shot up the people. So basically what he's saying, what the regime has been saying, is that the regime has opened, the protesters have opened fire on themselves, shades of Syria, when the Syrian regime said that the rebels were gassing themselves. This is a common tactic. And so, yeah, they're able to acknowledge that violence happened. They just say that they're not responsible for it. It was shadowy groups and figures likely from abroad, is what they say.
Yeah, and then there's the question that was mentioned at the outset by Kian of mourning the dead. Burying the dead can be an ordeal, both with ransoms to release bodies, and according to the UN rapporteur on human rights, claims of families forced to sign statements claiming their loved ones worked for the Basiji militia or other regime outlets and were killed by the protesters. Also, fears for those treated in hospital.
Absolutely. I've been receiving many reports of security forces, including plainclothes security forces, going into hospitals to identify protesters, but also to detain them. And I think, and that has been reported, again, not just in one province, but in multiple provinces. And I think this creates a really chilling effect.
Behnam Ben Taleblu, can we say that the crackdown is over or not?
Well, the crackdown is morphing into a new phase. As Borzu just mentioned, if there's protesters now contracting and now conglomerating in certain areas, well, those will be areas that in the future will be targeted as past as prologue by security forces. But I would say the crackdown continues. What we're hearing right now is the score settling behind some not so closed doors. Yes, you still have fits and starts of internet connectivity, but the scores are being settled with the friends, with the family members, with those detained, with those hospitalized, with those killed. The varied security apparatus is now being bolstered by the two other elements of the regime's repressive apparatus, which is the judiciary. Sometimes we call that the injustice system of the Islamic Republic, as well as on cyberspace, where with even limited connectivity, some Iran regime-linked hacking groups are active again. So both on cyberspace and via the judiciary, the repressive apparatus continues, but also in real life, the score settling. I got to tell you, some of the most horrific things that I've seen and heard comes from what they've done to bodies that were shot, again, as Borzu mentioned, by pellet or by buckshot, but were still alive. We've seen people literally dying on camera. And then there were reports of score settling into hospitals, not just to detain them, as the UN Special Rapporteur just mentioned, but to also kill them, to clear out hospitals. There was even a horrific report of jugular veins. Again, this is yet to be confirmed. We're working with State Department former grantees to confirm these texts, but of jugular veins being slashed by box cutters, one allegedly in a hospital and one allegedly of a dying protester on the street. So this is the continued score settling. I would call it still executions and still, yes, a crackdown from state against society and from state against the street.
And at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, are you working on some kind of a casualty toll, or is it too early?
Well, we can only report that which is being reported by internal sources, and we have been horrified by watching those same internal sources, which are doctors, lawyers, nurses, hospitals, hospital staff, morgues, morticians, friends, family members, loved ones, all who are willing to share something and say something. But given the fact that I personally know someone who was killed in November 2019 in Karaj in the previous round of protests where there was an internet shutdown and a massive crackdown from state against society, I stay one level removed. And I also advise my colleagues at FED to stay one level removed, to not dilute any authenticity of what is going on the street right now. What we do have at FDD, of course, is the protest tracker that conglomerates everything from social media about provinces, about rates, about every single place where there's a small, medium, or large protest, to help with the documentation effort that could come after the crackdown. But make no mistake, we're still watching this from a policy perspective. And the one thing you do hear from Iran, regardless of age, regardless of orientation, is what will Trump do? We're a think tank focusing on national security. We're focusing right now on what will the president do? And the president has both allies and adversaries alike guessing. There's this armada amassed in his own terms near Iranian waters, but outside the Persian Gulf. But at the same time, of course, the president is still talking
I want to get
about
to
a
that
deal.
point. I want to get to that point in a minute. I just want to finish on this important point of how you document things first. And Lila Jacinto, of course, it's incredibly difficult, even 4 weeks later, even though the internet in fits and starts is starting to come back on, to properly assess exactly how much of a crackdown, how swift it was.
Yes, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work, and a lot of this work, at France 24, for instance, is being done by our colleagues of Iranian origin, and they are absolutely inundated, and trying to corroborate everything. But I just edited a piece for our website, once again, on the testimony of doctors and this consistent reports that doctors have of seeing wounds that are out of, semi-automatic rifles, military-grade injuries to their patients coming in. And, doctors are even having to lie about, what patients are admitted for. Some of the doctors are saying that a patient is admitted for liver conditions, etc., in order to escape this surveillance and security crackdown. So it's extremely grim work. Iran has seen waves of anti-regime protests in the past, but the crackdown this time, what people are telling me is it's seen in proportions that are unheard of. The levels of crackdowns that were earlier seen in the peripheral regions, in the Kurdish regions, for instance, now in the main cities, in Tehran and the cities in central Iran. So it's like that level of military-grade brutality and bloodshed came into the heart of Iran.
And Kian Habibian, the reopening of the internet, is that a good thing, or does it also increase the anxiety to a certain degree for those who are still inside?
Well, despite the indicators, internet is not completely back on. It is based on a whitelist that favors the members of the regime. And those few people who are lucky enough to either have a Starlink satellite or, I don't know, they're lucky to be in an area where internet is back on. It is absolutely essential that the international community finds ways to activate internet inside. Why? Because when you have a regime that shuts down the internet to commit this massacre, it means that they're afraid of what the people outside are going to see. So it is absolutely necessary for the people inside to get the internet, to get the news, to show to the world what is happening. So it is what is actually expected from the international community, is to find and to reactivate internet inside of Iran.
And just on this internet connectivity, I mean, let's not forget that this round of protests was sparked by the bazaris, by the merchants in the Grand Bazaar, many of whom need the internet in order to do business. So the fact that the regime continues to keep blocking the internet, it shows how desperate the regime is, basically, because this started with the economic problems before it spread into widespread anti-regime.
Borzo Dargahi, 20 days, 4 weeks. Are you surprised the lengths to which they went by this internet shutdown?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, it was one of the. I mean, very early on, I was noting that this is one of the that the regime was not worried because they had not taken that step. And when they take that step, is a sign that they feel themselves somewhat under an existential threat. And they've done it before. It wasn't the first time they shut down the internet. But it is absolutely true that they don't want these stories coming out, or they want this to slow down the trickling of these stories.
All right. In the meantime, the U.S. president, as Benham was saying earlier, posting that a massive armada, as he put it, bigger than the one in the Caribbean, was headed Iran's way. Donald Trump saying time is running out for a nuclear deal. That's what the focus is on in this posting to Truth Social. Karis Garland has more.
With anti-US messaging on billboards and in headlines on Iranian newspapers, tensions are simmering amid threats of a US attack on Iran. On Wednesday, President Donald Trump again renewed his warnings, referring to a US naval strike group that is now in Middle East waters. Trump said the fleet was larger than one sent to Venezuela before the kidnapping of that country's president. He called on Iran to negotiate a, quote, fair and equitable deal, mentioning no nuclear weapons. Trump suggested that if there was no response, the next attack would be far worse than last year's US strikes on Iran under Operation Midnight Hammer. The Iranian mission to the United Nations hit out at the threat on social media, saying Iran stands ready for dialogue based on mutual respect and interests, but if pushed, it will defend itself and respond like never before. Speaking at the UN later, China warned against what it called military adventurism in Iran. Earlier this month, Trump pulled back from threats of military action over Tehran's deadly crackdown against anti-government demonstrations, claiming the regime had reversed a decision to hang hundreds of protesters, and amid pleas from Gulf nations to de-escalate. Last week, though, Washington said it was sending a massive fleet to the region just in case. Analysts say US options include strikes on military facilities or targeted hits against the leadership under Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in a full-scale bid to bring down the regime. Meanwhile, in Europe, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said Wednesday that the Iranian government's days were numbered. The EU is expected to sign off on a first volley of sanctions over the deadly crackdown this Thursday. There are also discussions to add Iran's Revolutionary Guards to the bloc's terrorist list, but it's unclear if France will oppose such a move.
And France in the last hour, which has stated it would agree to put the Revolutionary Guards on a terror list. Behnam Ben Taleblu, in that report, we saw the post to Truth Social by Donald Trump. It seemed to be all about the nuclear deal. There was nothing about human rights. There was nothing about the crackdown.
That's right, Francois. Most unfortunately, if this path is pursued, it would be a moral, political, and strategic mistake of epic proportions, not just for the U.S., but for the Trump administration and the president himself in particular. It would undo the rhetoric about having finished the job and having, quote unquote, destroyed or obliterated Iran's enrichment facilities that he himself proffered back in June, July, August of 2025, following the 12-day war. And on the moral front, let me just double tap that with you, if you don't mind, because we are in a situation right now where one of the most nationalistic populations in the heartland of the Middle East is asking for help, is asking for assistance. Now, this doesn't happen often when Iranians look abroad in this fashion, in this regard, given the scale of the crackdown, 30 to 30,000 killed based on various reports right now. And I fear that that number, as Kian mentioned, will only grow over time. And there is no nuclear deal with this sort of regime when you have drawn a red line, not over the nuclear issue, not over ballistic missiles, not over transnational terrorism, but over human rights and the crackdown by the state against the street. I mean, the president didn't just mention this once or twice and move on. He mentioned this reportedly 8 or 9 times this month, January 2026 alone. And he has a track record on this as well. So it would be a real, again, I want to foot stomp this, mistake for Washington, for the administration in particular, to be seeking a limited nuclear agreement right now, particularly given the death counts, but also particularly given the statements of support.
That's what Donald Trump has done. Why?
I'm hoping, and many ought not to project their hopes onto U.S. strategy, but I am hoping that this is more of the same as what we've seen in 2025, where the president feigns left and leans right. That was precisely the direction that he went in vis-a-vis, striking Iran's nuclear program and supporting Israel's strikes on that program in 2026. But let me just say this a little bit more declaratively, if you don't mind. Even if there is a strike, there is a great question as to what degree does the strike nest itself into a larger strategy by the U.S. This is not a one-and-done operation. This is not Venezuela. But also, this is not a situation where you can kind of negotiate with a blood-soaked regime where large swaths of society have spent considerable time, effort, and blood to oppose it, and you have politically supported that effort.
Borzu Daragahi, what does Washington want?
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that Washington knows what it wants. I know what the American people want, and that is no to the airstrikes, as consistently shown. No appetite for a regime change on the part of Americans. No attention, no focus on the part of this particular president. And I don't see I don't see in this government or in the mood of the American people the kind of determination and commitment of resources that it would take to bring about regime change from abroad. I think that airstrikes might make the regime stronger. I have to differ with Behnam there. And I'm not sure that it would make it weaker. This regime, the glue of this regime is war. It was the Iran-Iraq war that wedded the clerical regime to a significant portion of the Iranian population. That is the core of the regime. There is a significant, and I've spoken to these people, significant core of the regime and the younger people there as well who welcome some kind of conflict with the U.S. as a way to revitalize the spirit of the Iran-Iraq war. So I think that there is no one and done. There's nothing. There's no regime change except of the type that brought about the regime change in Iraq. And I think that this is risky. This is risky for the United States as an American, and it's risky for Iran as well as an Iranian.
Kian Habibian, how does it make you feel, this aircraft carrier, the USS Lincoln, being in the area? Is that good or bad?
Well, as a human rights activist, it is one of the topics that goes beyond my capabilities. What I focus on is the civilians inside of Iran. We talked about a deal, and the deal would be about the nuclear program that the Islamic Republic has. So let's pretend for a second that they sign a deal. What happens to the people? Is there a world where the Iranians would back the regime after they slaughtered at least 30,000 people? I mean, in what world are we living that we have a president that called the Iranians to go in the streets? Imagine for a second how cruel
U.S. President Donald Trump.
U.S. President, how cruel it is to tell to the people that you should go in the streets, help is on the way, and not come.
How did Iranians feel when this was at the height of the protests at the start of the month? How did the Iranians feel when Trump tweeted, help is on the way?
They felt betrayed. They felt betrayed because they have been fighting.
Did they take it seriously?
They took it seriously because for the past 47 years, it is not yesterday that the Iranians have decided that the Islamic Republic of Iran is not legitimate to their eyes. They have been fighting for 47 years. Every time with tremendous courage, they take to the street and weaken the regime from inside. I'm not saying that it is only up to them to decide. We can have, and actually we must have, international help. It is the duty of the international community to bring help. I'm not saying how. They have many levers at their disposal. We talked about internet, we talked about sanctions, we talked about targeted military actions. This is not my field of expertise. What I'm saying is the people felt betrayed. Because right now, I have people my age, people the age of my parents and my grandparents who have died because there was a false promise that was made for them. And right now we see the international community, making plans and probably doing Excel sheets and seeing whether there is a financial or economic or resource interest for them to help the Iranians.
Oh, we saw in that report the Europeans were going to put talking about putting the Revolutionary Guards on a terror list.
But they need to do more. It is not.
What is more?
What is more? Once you sanction the Islamic Republic of Iran and especially the IRGC, the next step is to declare that this government is not legitimate anymore. This is actually what has been done in the conflict between Palestine and Israel. The terrorist word used for Hamas made it possible in the deal to move them aside from any possibility for them to represent the Palestinians. And we can do the exact same thing with the IRGC and the Islamic Republic. Because of this terrorist word, because of this labeling, we can act the fact that they're not legitimate. And then in a second phase, expel the diplomats of the Islamic Republic, because as long as they are here, they're going to try to buy time. They're going to try to negotiate. It is their specialty to stay alive by negotiating. And the third step is acknowledging the wish of the Iranian people, what they are saying in the streets when they chant whether the name of the Air Prince or when they talk about freedom. What they call for is a democratic and secular transition.
All right, and we see, again, this question of what the United States wants. Syria's president's in Moscow negotiating the future of Russian bases in neighboring Syria. Iran on the back foot, especially since that ouster in late 2024 of Bashar al-Assad. So are the Kurds, who in neighboring Syria no longer have the backing of the United States. Lila Jacinto, you penned a piece for France24.com about this. The U.S., which has several hundred forces in Syria, last week, their special envoy saying it's mission accomplished. I'm paraphrasing here. And therefore, it's time to hand over to the Central Authority in Damascus. Now, this has marginally something to do with what we're talking about, but it's more, again, is the United States getting out of the region or going in?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, with a lot of things that we see in the Middle East, one can see a repeat of what's happened in the past. To your point about President Trump, asking the people of Iran to go on the streets and protest. We had President Bush, the former President Bush, asking Iraqi Kurds to come up, and take to the streets. So Washington has a history of letting people down after promising them some help. In terms of what's happening in Syria, I think from Washington's perspective is, look, Trump is perfectly happy with transitional president Ahmad Shara. The Syrian president right now is in Moscow, and he seems to be able to be playing Washington and Moscow. So Trump, has no intention in Syria of recreating a sort of an Iraqi Kurdistan. Right, which is what the Kurds of Syria would like to see. He's very much in line with what Damascus wants to see, and very important, what Turkey wants to see, these Central Arab states.
Does the U.S. lose leverage on Iran when it pulls back from Syria?
Well, I think from Washington's perspective, Iran is a separate dossier. And the Kurds, Iran's Kurds have always been overlooked, and they will continue to be overlooked. So from Washington's perspective, it's perfectly happy that Tehran's axis of resistance has been cut. Hezbollah's considerably weakened. Tehran was much more concerned about this when Bashar al-Assad fell, when it lost its boots on the ground, literally, and had to withdraw its own fighters. So I think the regime in Tehran right now is very much focused on its own survival. When it comes to, intervention from the U.S., you said Donald Trump, drew a red line, but really Trump's lines are always shifting. What is very important for what is probably happening in the Trump administration is whose advice are they listening to? Borzu mentioned Iraq. Iraq was a template of how you try regime change, but then you haven't settled the day after. And what is very interesting is the Arab Gulf states. These are Sunni regimes. They have no love for the Shiite regime in Tehran, but they fear the blowback of a collapse of the Iranian state. And so you have countries like Saudi Arabia saying you cannot use Saudi space if there is, an intervention. So more and more likely, we are possibly going to see some strikes, which, it's really ironic that Trump is talking about come to the table for a nuclear deal, because in June, he assured us that Iran had lost its nuclear capability, that U.S. strikes during the 12-day war were successful. So, there's absolutely no consistency. But I think a lot of people, unfortunately, think that, the U.S. does not have the stomach to manage a regime change, among other reasons, because there is no real figure as an alternative that can be projected. There are various figures that have been projected, primarily the former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. We have no sense of how popular he is, how would people mobilize. This is a vast country. It has many ethnic groups. Right now, they are all coalitions because of their hatred of the regime, but they could have their own agendas once this regime falls. And even when we're talking about the fall of the regime, we're possibly talking about some figure falling and some other faction coming up. So, even this talk about a total regime change, I am not so certain that can happen.
Is Venezuela the template that the Americans are looking at, that they think, we can get rid of the head and keep the structure. That way we keep the stability. And the U.S., through its Secretary of State, which this Wednesday has been saying that they're having a good working relationship now with Caracas, even sending a diplomatic mission soon. So is the scenario that Leila talked about at the end, is that how the U.S. envisions Iran?
I mean, to be frank, everyone saw Trump in Davos last week. This guy is not well, and his cabinet is kind of a mess. The people around him are working at cross purposes. This is not a guy who's committed to democracy in Minnesota, much less Iran. So I just, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And in this particular case, I don't even think the good intentions are there with regard to Trump and any possible role he may play or his administration may play in regime change. So yes, I mean, that is possibly the way that Trump would sell out the Iranian people, cut a deal with the supreme leader. You're not going to be able to take out the supreme leader. You might gain some kind of concession. Okay, we commit to no more enrichment. We curtail our missile program. We stop any support that we have for Hezbollah. We'll leave Lebanon alone. We'll stop support for the Houthis. It won't work because the Houthis will just continue to be what they are, regardless of Iran. And then Iran will be somewhat welcomed back into the fold of nations. And that is probably one idea in the Trump camp. That is probably something he'd go for. I mean, I joke, but it's a poignant comment in a way. But, the Islamic Republic could offer Trump a Trump Tower Tehran deal, and Trump would be happy and declare victory, and then, go back to watching movies about his wife.
Behnam Bentaleblouy, is that the thinking in Washington? You agree?
Well, the thinking in Washington, again, is that I think in 2025, we saw President Trump pursue every single Iran policy almost at once, or to blow through every option almost at once. We saw the president go from restoring maximum pressure sanctions to seeking diplomacy to supporting an Israeli strike to getting an American strike to supporting European pressure at the United Nations. So the president has literally run through the gambit of options on the table. I think if past this prologue, the president's threats are serious. I mean, lest we forget, this is a president who was willing to pull the trigger against Iran's chief terrorist, Qasem Soleimani, when nobody else would across 4 different administrations before him. And similarly, this was a president who was willing to take out the crown jewel of the Islamic Republic's nuclear program, which was their enrichment facility, which is destroyed, which, by the way, to Leela's previous point, the one reason why during the snapback crisis at the United Nations Security Council in September and October, as well as now during President Trump's not 1 or 2, but 8 or 9 times, he has threatened the Islamic Republic in the month of January alone. One reason why the Islamic Republic can't fall back on a tried and true tactic, which was nuclear escalation, particularly changing the purity level of the uranium it was enriching or changing the volume, growing the volume of the uranium it was enriching, was precisely because Operation Midnight Hammer to that end was successful. So I think the president, unfortunately, again, has all of us, not just allies and adversaries, but all of us whose eyes are glued to what is going on in Iran, and our hearts are being turned upside down when we hear some of the most horrific stories of how young Iranians, average Iranians, continue to be killed and hunted by this regime. We all are watching and waiting to see what the president will do. I mean, I think it is entirely possible that the president uses the armada for mere leverage and just military containment and kind of turns the Islamic Republic into a state that can limp along, as well as it is to pursue a Venezuela option for him, as well as it is to pursue a full regime change option for him. And we haven't even begun to discuss on this show today, and probably it's worth a separate segment, the other I country in this equation, which is Israel, and the degree to which they're plugged into the thinking from the White House, and the degree to which they may support or not support any of these strategies as well.
Do you think that the Israelis are holding undue sway in the mapping of a strategy in Washington?
No, I think it's eerily quiet at the moment. Countries that are pretty much punching well above their weight, traditional American partners in the region, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar, all of which have done some level of mediation or moderation between the Trump administration and the Islamic Republic. With the Israelis, I think there's some real open questions here. There's one school of thought, which is America just going to pave the pathway for us to go back to resumption of the 12-day war, to go to day 13, to go to day 14, day 15, which is not necessarily to do with the repressive apparatus, which is what Iranians want taken out, but the bigger strategic systems, meaning what's left of the nuclear program, and perhaps most importantly, the missile threat. The other thing the Israelis, I think, are most concerned about at the moment is how does the missile math factor into this equation? The Iranians have threatened to respond not just against Israel, but also against American facilities and also against naval targets, Israel is still rebuilding its interceptors, which cost more time and more money to build than Iranian medium-range ballistic systems. So there's a lot more questions than answers as to what the Israelis may be doing or may be waiting or hedging on this go around.
All right, so a lot of unanswered questions. Kian Habibi, I've seen a lot of reports over the last couple of days in publications and on social media among the Iranians abroad, this feeling of survivor's guilt, which is irrational, of course, but it's this idea that why are we here when others are being slaughtered? When you compare the mood to what it was after the Women Life Freedom protests, which petered out over time, how would you describe the difference this time?
I think we could describe it with one word: the horror, because we have reached a whole new scale of violence of the Islamic Republic against its own population. We are talking about military-grade weapons. We're talking about hospital staff pushed outside to execute the people who are still left inside. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are injured and are not allowed to receive blood, and that's by order of the regime. So it's the horror of seeing a bloodbath in the streets. They leave the blood in the streets on purpose so that people can see. They put corpses, they stack corpses on each other so people can see. And right now, it's been 48 hours that there is also this discussion about where are the corpses of the women who have been killed. We don't know where they are. We have received reports of people who have been mutilated. We have reports of people who have been probably raped before they were killed, and we don't know what happened to them. They don't give back the bodies to the people, to their families. So when you put all these pieces together, you see a systemic repression that has been installed by the regime. And we talk about crimes against humanity. When we talk about these numbers, it is not just, and it's horrific to say that, a classic repression. We are talking about a live massacre of people inside the country that has been abandoned by everyone outside.
Is the regime stronger or weaker right now?
The regime is weak. It is only the answer of the weak to use weapons against people who are unarmed. When you see this level of violence, like I said earlier, people in the streets are really young. They have hopes and dreams. They were hoping for a better life. They want change. They want to take the control of their own destiny. So when you see this level of violence, when you see all these threats against everyone, despite also the tweets by Donald Trump, they keep saying that they're going to hang the people who have been arrested. They keep saying that what Mr. Trump said is not true about the 800 people who were supposed to be executed. So this is just, I'm sorry, it's really hard to find words because we're talking about people we have worked with people we have shared memories with. Therefore, it's really hard to find the right words to describe what they're trying to tell us for the past few days.
And there'll be more to come as over the next few days. Kian Habibi, many thanks for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having us.
I want to thank Borzo Daragahi for being with us from Istanbul, Benan Bentalablu in Washington, Lila Jacinto. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.